Chair of the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences and professor at the University of Cape Town. And the two of them, between the two of them, they will take you through the statement, and I will field some questions that you may have to answer, and then we'll have some closing remarks. But let me hand you over to Professor Sitas to welcome you formally from the South African BRICS think tank.
Well, thank you, Jaya. This is a historic moment because, unlike many other multilateral bodies in the world, BRICS is moving ahead and trying to create a new architecture for interactions globally and locally. I think that we'd like to thank the HSRC for its sterling work in leading the South African BRICS think tank and being very active in the construction of the mission and vision document of the BRICS. And I think it is appropriate to call on Professor Shisana, who led this process up to now, to provide us with an official statement and the key elements of the briefing. Then, as you know, there will be questions and there will be some closing remarks at the end. So, Professor Shisana, we're all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are all aware of the fact that there was the BRICS summit that was held in Ufa on the 9th of July, and the theme was BRICS partnership, a powerful factor of development. And I think that's important that it's now called a powerful factor for development, showing very clearly that BRICS is no longer just an institution that is focusing on economic activities, but it's looking at development in its broadest sense. And that, to me, is exciting. But I'm going to focus a lot more on the elements of the declaration that focus on the work that was done by the BRICS Think Tank Council, but putting it obviously within the context of the BRICS declaration that was adopted by the heads of state. And I'm going to be focusing on the 5 pillars that are important. But before I do that, let me just say that it was encouraging to see that all of the heads of state were focusing on the question of a strong commitment for continued action in implementing its strategic 5 long-term goals. So in that, as a team, they are very much committed to the question of economic cooperation and development, consolidating peace and security, and focusing on the question of social justice, sustainable development, as well as quality of life, and also in terms of looking at the global political and economic governance reform, which has always been an issue that BRICS has been concerned about, and the importance of knowledge and innovation. Now, all of this form part and parcel of the work that has been done by the BRICS Think Tank Council, building on previous declarations that have been taken to ensure that whatever it is that the BRICS Think Tank Council was proposing was already in line with the policy direction of BRICS, but giving it much more meat in terms of content, in terms of evidence that has been generated from research. So that to me was very exciting to see that the work of the BRICS Think Tank Council has actually informed the BRICS Summit. Now, the other thing that I just want to start discussing is really focusing on the 5 pillars of cooperation. And I'm going to come into discussions now on the question of peace and security. The BRICS Summit has actually concentrated a lot more on the principles and rules of international law. They are committed that everything that needs to be done under BRICS should be taking into account the central role of the United Nations. That the United Nations itself should really be the basis upon which countries engage in order to prevent war and conflicts. that if we are to promote progress and development of humankind, we have to ensure that we follow the rules of international law. In that way, we will be able to work together to prevent a lot of conflicts. The other thing that they focus on is the question of the need for a comprehensive reform of the United Nations, something that BRICS has been strong at for many, many years since they've started. This is about, the 7th year that BRICS has been really working on this issue of the comprehensive reform of the United Nations to make it much more of an efficient organization. And that reform includes also the question of reform of the UN Security Council, so that it is made more representative. I do note in the fact that in the declaration, the Russia and China do call for greater participation of South Africa, Brazil, and also of South Africa, Brazil, and the others to ensure that they are part and parcel of the UN. They play a greater role with regard to the United Nations activities. The other thing I just want to mention with regard to this is that we must encourage cooperation on matters related to terrorism, drug trafficking, and peaceful use of outer space resources. So those are some of the 3 important areas in the area of peace and security that we believe that it needs to be addressed. But the other issue that also needs to be looked at is the question of the conflicts that are taking place in the Middle East as well as in Africa as a whole. As you know, that Africa has got many, many conflicts, and there is a need to find a sustainable and peaceful settlement, of those disputes. This is the same position that they've taken in the Fortaleza Declaration, and they re-emphasize this in UFA, which is showing that they are very committed to finding peaceful ways of resolving those. But they do want to make sure that the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, as well as the UN Human Rights Council, should be informing the way in which these conflicts are actually being resolved. On the second issue related to social justice, sustainable development, as well as quality of life, the declaration strongly supports the current international efforts towards the development of the post-2015 agenda. They don't want us to go away from the Millennium Development Goals, that there must be a seamless way of integrating the new post-2015 agenda with the Millennium Development Goals to ensure that whatever it is that's being done, we don't drop the things that we did not complete. There are many things that were incomplete about the MDG, and the declaration would like to ensure that there is some continuity with regard to that. In other words, the issues of eradicating poverty should still remain as key in order to achieve sustained, equitable, and inclusive economic growth and sustainable development, which should obviously be based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities of countries. So we all understand that all these 5 countries are different, and it's going to be very important that as we advocate for addressing the post-2015 development agenda, we take into account the differences that exist within each one of the countries, that they will use different approaches to achieve the same goals. Now, the other thing on social justice that we need to look at, which was interesting and it's a new one, and that comes in largely from the work of the BRICS Think Tank Council, is the issue of public health and the impact that it has, on the world. The other areas of concern, obviously, still as part of public health, is the question of the drug problem, the question of the non-communicable diseases, as well as communicable diseases, and so far as HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria, and Ebola are concerned. So it is encouraging to see that there is this interest. And with respect to non-communicable diseases, we're talking much more about the physical and mental health, of the population, that these are the issues that should form part and parcel of the agenda of BRICS. This, to me, is a major step forward in the sense that we're going beyond the economic issues and now beginning to look at the things that improve the quality of lives of the citizens in the countries. The other areas that have now come in very strongly is the question of basic education as well as higher education. And those are important, especially if you see the emphasis on the question of equal and accessible and high quality lifelong education, meaning that we are not just concerned about young people that are, or pupils that are going to school, but in terms of adults and making sure that the adults also continue to get education, for all. The other interesting area that is new now, which has been developing over the last year, is the question of establishing the BRICS network of universities, as well as a university league. You will all know that they have already produced some of the results this year with regard to the university league. Finally, in terms of the whole issue of social justice, I just want to touch on is the question of asking the statistical agencies to come up with a list of indicators to measure and monitor progress in health and education across BRICS. That's important because most of the resources in all of these five countries are spent on this particular two issues of health and education. On the political and economic governance, which is the third pillar that we have been focusing on as a think tank, is that they are calling for the question of political reforms, obviously of the United Nations, but also of the G20, the WTO, and IMF, that they need to enforce the principles of transparency, of inclusiveness to better represent the concerns of developing nations. Now that is encouraging to see that they are now beginning to tackle some of those international institutions which have been used in order to address the concerns of the developing countries. In particular, I'm not referring to the IMF, which has been an issue that they've been looking at for many years, but I'm talking about the G20 itself, as well as the WTO. The other issue that has been discussed in terms of political and economic governance is a strategy to promote economic cooperation for growth and development, and then also mitigate the effects of dependence on existing multilateral institutions by coming up with the new development bank and the contingency reserve arrangement, which are no longer theoretical, but now they're going to be active. They are beginning to be active, as shown by the meetings that were held by the leaders under the chairpersonship, of Russia. They've been able to meet and begin to have a discussion, on these issues in terms of how they are going to be operating. We are very pleased with the fact that they have signed the MOU for cooperation on the new development bank, and that has occurred between the bank itself as well as the national banks or institutions, including our own South Africa DBSA. The creation of a platform for joint discussion on trade cooperation and among the BRICS countries, and the third one, the introduction of the inaugural meeting of the Board of Governors in the New Development Bank. So this means that we are now firmly on our way to implementing this new important economic governance program that the BRICS countries have agreed to. Now, the fourth one that I just want to address is the issue of progress through knowledge and innovation sharing. And again, this is something that the BRICS think tank has given a lot of thought to. And that is the question of the importance of ICT in human development as a tool for transition from information to a knowledge society, which is going to be supporting the principles of multilateralism, of democracy, of transparency, and mutual trust. So in other words, the ICT is used beyond what we always use it for, of being able to communicate, but really to strengthen the relationship, amongst all of these countries. To that extent, there is an interest in the development of a universally agreed rules of conduct with regard to the use of ICT networks at a global level to ensure that the information that is being transported from one country to the other is used for the benefit of cooperation of countries in a positive manner, and also to address the issues of national security interests. We all are aware of the challenges that have taken place since ICT has been discovered and has been implemented in many countries, that there's quite a lot of cyber security breaches that has been taking place, and they are suggesting that we ought to have some universally agreed rules that are going to help in order to address the security concerns of that. But the other issues that they wanted to do is to make sure that there is some sharing of information on the best practices in relation to security and the use of ICT, in relation to the effective coordination against cybercrime, and with regard to the establishment of the nodal points in member states, as well as intra-BRICS cooperation using existing computer security incident response teams, and finally with regard to the establishment of a joint research and innovation platform for the implementation of BRICS framework program. Now, it is encouraging that amongst all of these things, the idea is that there must be some funding of multilateral joint research projects for research. So it's not just a question of you have the ICT, but what kind of research do you need to do that is going to help to achieve this particular pillar? And I just want to conclude by saying that these 5 pillars for the BRICS strategy were actually proposed to the BRICS Heads of State Summit in Fortaleza in 2014, and that was done by the BRICS Think Tank Council. And at a later point, we all worked together to produce a long-term vision strategy, which has now been adopted as part and parcel of the program of action for the BRICS. And we're informed through the declaration that several institutions are going to be involved in the implementation of this particular declaration. That is the BRICS Academic Forum, the BRICS Business Council, and also the BRICS Think Tank Council, that all of us have to work together in ensuring the implementation, supporting the implementation of these particular strategies. And it is very, very encouraging. As indicated earlier on by Professor Sitas, the HSRC has formally handed over its responsibilities for managing the BRICS Think Tank Council to the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, and we hope to continue to support them, until that they are independent, of the HSRC, which may take between 1 and 2 years, or even up to 3 years, depending on how quickly they can be able to set up the infrastructure. And we look forward to sharing with you any information through the questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olive, and thank you, Ari. We'll be able to take some questions now, and please identify yourself and the newspaper or media outlet for which you are based, and we'll take your questions. And we will get responses from many of the members of the think tank, South African BRICS think tank, and Professor Sitas and others who are sitting at the table. Please, Bohler.
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Siyabonga Mkhwanazi from Independent Newspaper. I just wanted to ask one question. Is there a level of commitment from BRICS members who sit in the United Nations Security Council, like Russia and China, to basically set out a timeline in which there should be thorough discussions in the UN and an end to discussions around the question of including other members? Basically a time frame in which these discussions on the reform should be wrapped up and decisions taken on whether we include South Africa in the Security Council.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much, Korean Makbani from Business Days. Just wanted to get the SABTT's take on the relationship between BRICS members, especially pertaining to the issue of migration and the recent row that's gone on regarding our visa regime, our incoming visa regime. President Jacob Zuma, or South Africa rather, did speak to BRICS leaders recently, speaking to them about relaxing terms of entry and exit for executives between the BRICS countries to make bilateral relations easier. And yet this is happening in the middle of the time when South Africa is making it, or some would argue that South Africa is making it all the more difficult for other people to enter the country through its new visa regime. I just wanted to get a point of departure on that from the Council itself. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, all of you want to take some questions? Or Ari, you want to answer?
I'm just going to pass on to some of my colleagues to make sure that they also have an opportunity to respond. And I'll start with Narnia, Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller.
Thank you very much, Olive. With regards to the United Nations Security Council question, it's a question that's actually been asked for a number of years now, in terms of timelines, actual implementation plans, and so on, for the democratization, if you want to call it that, of the United Nations Security Council. And there has been some uncertainty around this, and there are also regional concerns. And if I could point out the fact that the African Union has made a request for 2 permanent members to be included into the Security Council. And that is something that hasn't been agreed upon by the members of the UNSC. So that's an ongoing conversation, and it's not necessarily South Africa either. I'd like to point that out. It's two permanent members from the African continent, but of course South Africa would be very well placed to be on the Security Council. Some other reforms that are being suggested is that the veto becomes non-existent because of the fact that the veto doesn't allow a democratic system of decision making within the UNSC. So there are a number of issues that still need to be clarified, and both Russia and China, although they state support for increased participation, currently I do not think that they are willing to let go of their veto within the UNSC. With regard to the visas, if you don't mind me commenting on that as well, when we talk about BRICS, we don't only talk about business. I think Olive mentioned that earlier. It's also cultural exchanges. So the visa issue is a very sensitive one. If we make it easier for executives to travel, that's good, all good and well, but we would definitely want people-to-people contact within the BRICS countries. And unfortunately, there has been a little bit of a backlash in terms of visa requirements. I've noticed, because I need to go to China in September, that the Chinese visa application process is far more complicated than it used to be. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the new visa requirements that have been introduced by the Department of Home Affairs. But one is never certain of those kinds of things. We certainly do want members from other BRICS countries to come to South Africa as tourists. We want students to come to South Africa to study here, and we want people-to-people exchanges. So a serious conversation needs to be had around the visa regime.
Thank you.
Just add that there is, under the chairpersonship of the Russian Federation, there is supposed to be a meeting of BRICS ministerial meeting on migration. So hopefully some of these issues will be discussed at that.
Thank you. Ari, you want to raise anything?
No, fine.
Just to say there is being proposed what's called a BRICS card, which to facilitate the ease of doing business, but specifically this is related to business ventures amongst BRICS countries. And at the last academic forum, the question was also raised about research and cultural exchanges, but specifically on research issues for BRICS researchers to have exchange of ideas in order to facilitate the work of the BRICS Think Tank Council and the BRICS Academic Forum. So those are the two things that are probably going to be moving on a faster level. Yeah? Are there any other questions? No other questions? Okay. Ari?
I'm waiting.
Okay. Okay, I think that's kind of something. And please, I will leave you my card if you need to contact me at any point you can please do so, and I'm sure you can contact Sitas as well, and in case you need any follow-up discussions on that. Do you have any comments? Okay, Hari, please, you can close.
You know, the thing is, it is the most critical time now, because we're moving from ideas, from negotiations, from agreements, from declarations, to creating actual institutions. So, at first, everybody should look at it carefully, critically, help us create a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That's short and sweet. And like I said, we'll be available for any future comments. Thank you, Victoria. Ina.